when I did the revised onboarding and you asked me some questions and things like that, I got a focus goal, I think of like 3 hours a day, which I've read Cal Newport, I've read a bunch of that kind of stuff. Like it didn't shock me. But I would imagine that probably does violate some internal narratives and certainly like some organizational narratives, as you mentioned. When you were testing that with users, I'd be curious to hear like to what degree rescue time gets kind of adopted, like in an organizational sense. To the degree that it's mostly personal in nature. Did you find that when you were testing with users that it kind of violated their narratives? And then I guess secondly, what have you seen in terms of, I buy into this. I'm a team member. I'm an individual contributor, a manager, whatever it is. I buy into that idea that really I start to burn out, as it gets into like 5 hours a day or whatever it is, or I think I'm doing 5 hours of focus work, but I'm really not. How do they translate that, to your point, to the organizational level? Like, do they still have to continue to do this sort of theater, or do you know folks that have kind of managed to convince their larger team that no, like, you're going to practically speaking get 3 hours of focused work done a day. And if you do that, to your point, by 2:00, amazing, like go play golf or whatever. How have you seen that play out in other organizations or other customers?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. And like, Cal Newport's work is really important, and it's great that, it's getting out there. In fact, like, I think there's a whole chapter in his new book about us. But what's interesting about it is, like, I think we arrived at that conclusion independently. Our data shows it organically just over the last 14 years. Like, the average focus work time that people spend, especially in larger companies, is around 2 hours a day. Like that's the most you can expect from the average person. So if you're doing 2 hours of focus work, and that's very strictly defined, like includes things like, doesn't include usually things like email, unless you're somebody whose job requires you to be on email all the time, which is we account for that. Then, if you do more than 2 hours of focus work a day, you're in, you're above average, right? So we pick something that works for you and what works for your industry, what your role is, whether you're an IC or a manager, whether you're a small company or a big company, and what your personal like work goals and life balance goals are. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like it's surprising to people. And, we could do a better job, I think, of messaging that, especially with this new version. One of the things that we have is like, we're just so used to the idea that that's just the way it is, that sometimes we forget that like it's shocking to people. Like one of our beta users was like working, I think something like 5 or 6 hours of focus time and just like fried, like constantly fried. And mm-hmm. She was like, hey, like, does this mean I can stop when I get to 3? And we're like, yeah, like, and she's like, no, but I feel like I need to do more. Like nobody does, like nobody does more than that. It's just not a thing. Yeah. And she was like relieved. And yeah, I think we're not doing a good enough job with that. And so like, that's one of the things that came out of this launch and this beta period for us, where we're like, yeah, we really need to beat that drum more. And we need to like point to other people like Cal who are sort of like really kind of messaging this and show off all the data that we have about it. And then like help organizations, help teach organizations. Like we can put together email campaigns to like teach your boss, like this is what's normal. And sort of like help spread that knowledge. And one of the things that we don't want to do though is, and in fact, this was kind of a big driver in our refactor, was like, we don't want to create tattleware. Like we don't support the idea of managers running rescue time on their employees' computers and looking at their data. Like that's not a supported thing. And we will shut down accounts that do that. That's not our business. Our business is helping people balance.